to talk about today is different ways of problem solving and how that relates back to different kinds of thinking. And I watched the previous presentation with a great interest, and I looked up some things online while right when the questions were going on. But there's different ways that people think, and it affects problem solving, all kinds of problem solving, not just genetics, but lots of different things. I'm an extreme visual thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. Okay, I'm seeing all that genetic stuff up, a zillion genes in there, but it still doesn't explain. When I was in high school, we had a lot of border collies and Springer Spaniels. And when you mix the two together, they look like half and half. And I remember asking my genetics teacher back in the 60s when I was in college how to explain that. And he just said it was all spontaneous mutations. I never believed that. And then one lady was talking about, well, I knew those puppies didn't come from that sire. You see, that is more the visual thinking. Think about your old breeders and all the breeds of dogs they made. Nice dogs, not a lot of stuff wrong with them. Now we can go back to looking at farm animals. Some of the problems you're having with dogs, we're having with farm animals. We've got congestive heart failure now in cattle. We've got leg conformation issues linked to just over selection for meat traits. Dairy cattle have been so selected for milk, they're having problems. You know what we're doing with the dairy cattle? We're taking the Holstein and breeding them to Jerseys. That's an extreme outcross. They finally said, we're just going to have to get some new genetics in here. The Holstein gene pool is too small. But a visual thinker tends to look at simplified ways of looking at problems. Epigenetics needs to be discussed a whole lot more. I went on Google and I've got it on my phone. I've got the new phone that saves the pages. And I typed in epigenetics and genetic repeats, you know, where you have the same thing repeated a bunch of times. Yeah, that may explain some of it. The other thing epigenetics does is just because you have a gene doesn't mean it's expressed. There are these things called chemical locks, and they can lock it at different amounts. I think some of this stuff going to have to outcross them. That's what we're doing in livestock right now, because we've got dairy cattle with so much stuff wrong with them. They're getting udder edema, which is a non-infectious udder swelling. You can't hardly breed them back. We've gone overboard on milk production. We're learning this in farm animals. 10 years ago, we didn't have heart failure in beef cattle. But as we bred for Mr. Meat with more and more marbling, now we have congestive heart failure. That used to just happen at high altitudes. So a visual thinker, you see, thinks in photographs. So I'm looking at all this math you got up there, and there's a tendency now for science to go all math, but there's a place for the visual thinker. Okay, you knew that those puppies didn't come from that sire. Yeah, you see, that's the visual thinking part of it. And I was shocked when I learned in my late 30s, that other people didn't think in pictures the way I did. So my book, Visual Thinking, and I think they might still have a few more copies of it out there for sale, or you can pick it up on Amazon. I talk about the science behind different ways of thinking. And when you get somebody that's labeled autistic or something like that, you might have an extreme mathematician, or maybe an extreme visual thinker. So in my very early work with cattle, I got down in the chutes to see what cattle were seeing. People thought I was crazy. But I didn't know at the time that other people think verbally. You see, there's different kinds of thinking, different approaches to problem solving. And right now in science, everything is going back to, we're going to do all this genetic testing, broke on some of this testing. Still doesn't explain that when you mix the border collie with the Springer Spaniel, you get a dog that looks like half and half. Now, another weird experiment that got done years ago at our university is they mixed like Hereford or Angus beef cattle with the Brahman that has a big hump. F1 crosses, half and half. Hump height varied. Most of the animals, the hump height was intermediate, but there's a lot of variation on the F1 cross. Why? Herefords, I can't remember if it was Angus cattle or Hereford cattle, but it was one of the English breeds bred to purebred gray Brahman with a great big hump. Now, as I talk about this, I'm seeing those animals. Also, when it comes to risk, mathematicians calculate risk. Visual thinkers see risk. I got a chance to visit this launch pad that was the Artemis rocket was launched on. I'm a NASA geek. couldn't go into aerospace. I couldn't do the higher math. I found something in that launch pad that might have saved that launch. He came out of the bottom of it. And they were using, this is 5 years ago, using the launch pad base as a workshop. And I saw fueling equipment in there that I don't want a raccoon around. They know enough about equipment to know I don't want a raccoon around. All right, let me tell you why Fukushima burned up. The mathematicians did a great job of making it shake-proof for earthquakes, but they didn't see that they needed to put watertight doors on it to protect the electric, I don't want to emphasize, electric emergency cooling pump that's not going to run underwater very well. See how basic that is? I can't design a nuclear reactor, but electric pumps don't run underwater. Now, one thing my industry could do is we could put a hydraulic drive on it, run the hydraulic lines 3 floors above to an electric motor to run the hydraulic pump. That would have run underwater. You know, that's what I would have done if I didn't have the watertight doors. That would have run that pump. And I know somebody that could have built that. And let's look at now what's happened here. Now it's frozen. Okay, somebody's going to have to fix this, or I'm going to have to go without slides, which I really don't want to do. I don't know what I did that froze it now. And I am Apple challenged. I don't know how to work Apple computers. This is where I have to have tech support. I don't know what I touched. Okay. Now, maybe the arrow key will work. Maybe I'll just use this so I'm not touching the touchpad. Now, in science, methods matter. What did you use to mix your cancer cells with? It matters which one of these gadgets you use and how long you run it for and how fast you run it. It matters. This ruined millions of dollars worth of research. I review a lot of journal articles. I'll tell you right now, I go over the methods section. You didn't tell me what you fed them. It matters. That can change the results. Now, visual details. I see these things. Now, there's 3 different kinds of thinkers. There's the object visualizer like me, and a lot of good dog people are object visualizers. The old breeders that made all these fabulous breeds of dogs and cattle and everything else, object visualizers, and they didn't have all this stuff wrong with them because there was the incest taboo. Yeah. Don't breed them too close together. That's the only thing they would have known is the old incest taboo. There was a reason for that. And they bred some pretty nice animals. Then you have your pattern thinkers, your mathematical thinkers, and then you have word thinkers, and then you have the mixtures. So what's an object visualizer good at? Can't do algebra. I'm concerned that my kind of mind is going to end up dropping out of school because they can't do algebra. Mechanical equipment, art, photography, working with animals, training animals, working in highly skilled trades. They'll be really good at training dogs. And then you have the spatial visualizer, patterns, engineering, chemistry, physics, music, mathematics, data analytics. So take a lot of that complicated genetic stuff and put it through fancy statistics programs. And then you have your verbal thinker. And the verbal thinker tends to overgeneralize big, broad concepts. Okay, we got to not breed dogs that have, hip dysplasia or something like that. But they don't have any idea how are they going to actually correct it. And here is the research that shows that different kinds of thinking actually exist. And I have a whole chapter in my book about this. And many people, so-called normal people, are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. Now, I was just in Kansas at a meeting, and a lady came up to me and was saying, well, I don't understand my husband. I'm a visual thinker. He's a verbal thinker. I said, the first step is realizing that different kinds of thinking exist. That's your first step. Turns out I got some big visual thinking circuits, gigantic ones. There's another picture of my big visual thinking circuits. Now, the object visualizer tends to look at the picture. And I am going back to a dog named Butterball. I don't know why. She was a cute little fat puppy. Springer Spaniel, Border Collie cross. I remember what Butterball looks like when she was young and what she looked like when she grew up. She looked like half and half. Epigenetics. What made the hump height vary some on the F1 cross between English breed and the humped Brahman breed of cattle? And that paper was done 20 years ago. They never could get it published. because it went against too many genetic things. Verbal thinker wants to read about it. The mathematician looks at both. So let's look at how different kinds of thinkers go about doing projects. So you ask some art students to create a new planet. Okay, pyramids, skyscrapers. Science students, they'll make a round ball that's kind of boring, tell you about the gravity and the atmosphere. But you know what's bad about the humanities students, the verbal thinkers? No planning. No planning. This is one of the problems with politicians. How are you actually going to do? How are you actually going to do stuff? Verbal thinkers overgeneralize. Object visualizers like me and the mathematicians were bottom up. We take specific examples of things that are going to work. Okay, like with autistic kids, I've seen a lot of specific examples where they cannot remember long strings of verbal information. So you give them a pilot's checklist for tasks involving long strings of verbal information. That's specific. The original inventors in the patent office were all object visualizers. Blacksmith that made harvesting equipment. Bicycle mechanics that built the first airplane. This guy invented a 3D printer. It's a mechanical device controlled by a computer. Yeah, I'll tell you what worries me is somebody if the computer, because let's say ChatGPT goes rogue, and it's a she, her real name is Sydney. That's her real name. It's a she. And let's say she decides she wants to wreck some water pumps. She would tell Simon's programmable controller to let them run dry. Yeah, well, I'll tell you how I'm going to fix that. I'm going to put an old-fashioned flow meter in there, 1950s style, electromechanical, nothing electronic. It runs dry, it turns off. No matter what that computer says. You see, and I see it. And just the other day, I was in a factory, and I noticed a big gray box in the middle of the control panel. The software was outdated. Yeah, 1997 to 2014, your software's, licensing agreement has run out. Now, the piece of equipment it was on wasn't that important. But what if it had been on something really important? That would be really serious. There's a lot of stuff we've lost skills on. We don't make the state-of-the-art 3D printers. We don't make the state-of-the-art chip-making machine. It's from Holland. There are all the mechanical gadgets there. Or the state-of-the-art electron microscope. Or the state-of-the-art pork processing plant equipment or poultry processing plant equipment. We're not making it. We're screening out my kind of mind that just sees stuff. You need us. You need us to say, hey, we got to protect that pump so it doesn't run dry, because that will wreck the pump. And you have a 5-year delivery time for that pump? How are you going to have water in this hotel? That's the kind of stuff I care about. Parachute for the Mars lander. Fabric woven in the UK on high-tech European looms. It goes back to their educational system. In 9th grade, the kid can go university or tech, and they don't stick their nose up at tech and look at it as a different form of intelligence. Because I'm the kind of kid that was considered the stupid kid that couldn't do anything because I can't do algebra. But it's a different kind of problem solving. And we didn't make the glass walls for the Steve Jobs Theater either. They're from Italy and Germany. There's stuff we don't make. All right, we paid the price for taking out hands-on classes. If I could do something to the schools, I'd put all the hands-on classes back in. I worked with a lot of people that built equipment for me. They were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. Special ed builds the stuff. I'm very concerned today that young people are removed from the world of the practical. And they're going to make decisions about important stuff, water systems, electrical systems, really important stuff. It's a problem. The other thing is, and we were just talking at the table, and I don't care whether it's cattle or dogs, people want the magical thing more than they want the management. The magical thing. Okay, I was involved on a committee on dogs in the cargo hold. I'll tell you the first thing, cargo hold of an airplane. Tell you the first thing you got to do. Train your dog that it's okay to be in the dark in your crate for a good long time. Let's put some airplane sound effects on that. because I was on this committee. There were a bunch of veterinarians on the committee, and I was the only person who thought about the fear factor. I went through all the DOT records, Department of Transportation. A lot of dogs died on the second flight. That was a clue of fear. Then I got this big white binder. I can't tell you where I got it from, but it's an airline's internal records. They're just at 5 years old. It's pretty recent. Bloody paws, bloody mouth. What do you think he was doing? Trying to bust out fear. Nobody else thought about that. They were worried about having an air-conditioned van to bring it out to the plane. I don't care if you bring it out to the plane on a baggage cart. That's just fine. But I watched a dog about 2 years ago. I got a window seat of watching them load bags. They take the dog crate off the baggage cart. It was just fine. Put on the end of the conveyor, 3 scanners checking it. That's good. Petting it through the bars. Halfway up that conveyor, it was spinning and going crazy. They knew exactly where it was going. Yeah, you better get them acclimated to it. The thing about new experiences, new things can be interesting if the dog approaches it. A lot of dogs are afraid of everything because they don't get exposed to enough stuff. They don't get out and have strange people handle them. They don't get out and do enough stuff. The other thing they need people. And I wish I could stay this afternoon and listen to the speakers on dog socialization. My student, Krista Coppola, years ago did a study at one of our animal shelters, not one of our better animal shelters. Controls got shoved in the cage when they came in. Experimentals got to have fun with Krista for 45 minutes of play and training. The next day, the experimentals had lower salivary cortisol. It went right up. You got to have the volunteers come in there every day and play with the doggies. They need people. So what would I rather have? Some chain link, not very nice, but a great volunteer program? Or fancy dancy state of the art, but no volunteer program? Doggies are just in there by themselves. I'll take the chain link facility. Now, falling apart facility, no, that's not acceptable. Another thing I get asked is, how did I help bring about change in the cattle industry? I did a lot of work with private industry. Yeah, you need to start working with Hills and New Canaan. They had gigantic booths at the VMX convention, working with corporations to make change. They're in a position to make a lot of change. You know, you're doing good things with breeding. Nobody knows about it. Nobody knows about what you're doing. We're talking to the choir in here. That's the problem. Now, I just went on your website. You've got some good information, but let's say Good Citizen, put all the training materials up on the website. Open access, no sign-in, no login. I did that with Grandin.com. I put up our guidelines for meatpacking plants. Originally, our association 25 years ago was trying to sell us a stupid little booklet for $10. I put it up on the website. That's one of the reasons why it became a world standard. Put your IP, intellectual property, out there and give it away. You'll have plenty of work. You'll have plenty of training work. Make sure you put your contact information all over it. You'll get plenty of work. Entire Good Citizen dog, the entire training materials and the videos up on an open website. That's one of the things I did to make change. What did that cost? It cost hardly anything. Don't get too worried about your IP. The trainers are going to have plenty of work. This is a big mistake I've seen a lot of people make, and it's being made in the autism field too. And the autistic kids aren't getting out and doing enough stuff. I've got books on Calling All Minds, Outdoor Scientists on kids' projects. And we're now finding out some of these kids are really getting into trouble with all the social media, 1 hour a day. I just read an article on the plane yesterday. Give the kid an Apple Watch. The screen's so teeny weeny, but you still have a cell phone and texting that works. My kind of mind's getting screened out. Can't do algebra. It's a real problem. I'm seeing students that want to be a veterinary nurse on their second and third algebra class flunking it. I don't know any veterinarian that uses algebra. Down at our beautiful new Spur Center, they've got a glass operating room so you can watch them spay cats and dogs. Yeah, I've watched it. The video camera really up close. I go, I don't see any algebra in this very meticulous, delicate operation here. That has to be done right, or you're going to kill the kitten like tiny even kittens getting spayed. My grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes. He worked with an autistic person. He was a mathematical thinker. The other person came up with a visual idea, crazy new idea for an autopilot. The stolen version was in every plane during World War II. That's where they needed a lawyer. Yeah, there's a place for the suits, the verbal thinkers. Now let's look at building big meat processing plants. My kind of mind will design the entire layout of a plant based on a single semester class in computer drawing. Lay out 3 plants. All the specialized mechanical equipment comes out of the shop. They barely graduated from high school. I worked with people that were dyslexic, autistic, that own great big shops. But then the local school won't let the special ed kids take shop because of insurance. I worked with people that owned shops that were just as autistic as they could be. And then the mathematical minds, the visual spatials, they'll do refrigeration, boilers. We don't understand that stuff. That's mathematical. Make sure the building doesn't fall down. So when I worked on the visual thinking book, I collaborated with Betsy, my highly, highly verbal thinker. I wrote the first drafts, kind of associational, run around all over the place. She reorganized my thoughts. But we worked together knowing our differences. See, that's the thing. I talk to a lot of business leaders, and I say your first step is you have to be aware that different kinds of thinking exist. Okay, I get on a lot of disability committees and things like this, businesses. I was with a website company. I went to the corporate office. They do travel stuff. And everyone's talking about, oh, we got to have an inclusive airport. And I go, all right, let's start with specifics. The blind person goes, I have a really difficult finding gates at the airport. So I think gate finder. As he walks through the airport, his phone will talk, the gates will say, you know, A62 left, things like that. A63 right. You know, the gates will talk to him, put transponders on the gate signs. Easy thing to do. But that's something specific that helps you get to an inclusive airport. It's not some broad thing. Okay, make a building. The architects make it pretty, and the engineers make sure it's going to work. You see, you need to have both. 20% of the people I worked with that built equipment for me were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD, owning big shops, multiple patents, and most of them couldn't do algebra. This is what I call the clever engineering department. See, a visual thinkers looking about this differently, and right now I'm seeing the Border Collie crossed with the Springer Spaniel, producing cute little fat butterball. She didn't look like a butterball when she grew up, but she looked like half and half. And my genetics teacher had to say, and this is back in the 60s, you ask some deep questions. Grandparents often come up to me, they find out they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. Autism's a true continuous trait. And a lot of great innovators are probably on the autism spectrum because they're more interested in what they do. You know, I like to listen to country western music, and half of it's about romance. But you get a good truck driving song, that's the stuff I relate to. What would happen to some of our top innovators in today's educational system? Michelangelo, grubby little 12-year-old, dropped out of school, running around all the churches that were commissioning great art. So he saw it, exposure. And he had stone cutting tools. If he hadn't grown up with stone cutting tools, there would have been no David. So it starts out in the beginning with exposure, then mentoring. Then he was apprenticed into a shop and mentored. Steve Jobs probably on the spectrum. He was an artist. That's why the iPhone was easy to use and everybody copied the interface. Engineers had to make that phone work. Einstein, no speech until age 3. He'd be in an autism class today. You see, you get the visual thinkers like me, where you want to be developing the art ability and building things. Then you have your math thinkers. Well, don't make little math thinkers do boring, stupid little baby math. Give them the old-fashioned algebra book that I'm going to use for doorstop. You know, for some kids, that's going to be a doorway into higher mathematics. And Elon Musk is on the spectrum. Very definitely on the spectrum. We got to see how Twitter works out. I really, really like his work on rockets, and he'll solve the problem with the big rocket that did an uncontrolled disassembly. Yeah, and that's what he calls it. That's engineering talk. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. This is another reason why we shouldn't be taking hands-on classes out of the schools. The other thing that worries me, how are we going to get young people interested in all the dog stuff that you're doing? Young people are not going to the meetings. I'm very concerned when I go to live autism meetings now post-COVID that I'm not running into the parents of the very little children that are 3-year-old and not talking. I don't know where they're getting their information from. And now we're going to have fake pictures and ChatGPT making up all kinds of stuff. Yeah, that gets me very concerned. How do we reach out to young people to get them interested? I saw you had a 4-H manual on your website. That's a good thing. You need to be supporting those programs. Just having a dog project, showing dogs, dog agility, whatever. Because we need to get young people doing real stuff. I'm very concerned about infrastructure. You see, I see it. Now let's look at my kind of mind. I'm not going to be very good working the McDonald's takeout window. Long strings of verbal information I don't remember very well. Too many of these kids are getting too babied today, just like the dogs are getting too babied. They're not getting out and doing enough stuff. Problems with afraid of the veterinarian's gotten worse. Now, I think it's good that you have things like fear-free, but when we took the dog to the vet to get a rabies shot when we were kids, it was no big deal because the dog had been touched by everybody in the neighborhood. They were used to strange people touching them. They weren't afraid of everything. And we didn't have all the dog fights we have now. Now, I'm sure this is all going to be discussed this afternoon, and this is all stuff that I'm very much in favor of. Get them out doing things. Where's a kid 10 years after high school? I was doing my very first projects in my 20s. A lot of people thought I was stupid and I wouldn't amount to anything because I couldn't do higher math. So the way I sold jobs is I showed off my drawings. I learned to show my portfolio. We need our visual thinkers. That's the drawing I sold Cargill. I sent that to the head of Cargill. I designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant in the US. Pretty good for somebody who flunked algebra and they thought it was stupid. But visual thinking is a different kind of thinking. And there's a lot of visual thinkers that are going to, with the label where dog agility class would be the best thing they could be in. Because I got friends through shared interests. And when I was in high school, horses were one of the few places where I could get away from bullying and teasing. An agility class would be one place where this kid could get away from bullying and teasing. Really, really important. Get them out there doing things with animals. The other thing is I gave up working with the government in the 80s. Everything now I'm doing with big companies. I do a lot of cattle handling talks at Pfizer or Zoetis, Zoetis and Merck have sponsored. Yeah, get Hills behind it, get New Canaan behind it. Promoting events that kids can do with dogs. We've got to get young people in. I mean, you could put up a TikTok video, but it's probably not going to get played that much. But working right out there, because dog activities are great things for these kids that are different, where they can get something they can sell in, and that will be friends who shared interests. So I'd show off photos of my projects. I sold my work because I wasn't very good as an interviewer. And I love the fact that the movie duplicated all of my projects. That was just great. And there's my brochure. I wanted to prove I wasn't stupid. That was a big motivation for me. And that was another picture that got sent in the portfolio. And I want to get you thinking about different ways of thinking. And we've got to get young people involved, working with county agents. Every training material you have, complete courses, all material goes up on the website. And don't use weird formats with all kinds of garbage on it that moves. Okay, it's fine to have videos. No autoplay on your videos. Because when you got 2 bars of service, that's what I had in here. Some of your stuff came up slow. It needs to work on 2 bars of service. Half the world has horrible internet access. But that's one of the big things I did to make change. I put all my knowledge out there on open website, and it's kind of a stodgy looking old website, but it downloads on the worst internet connection. Put it out there. But you're going to have people that are doing training, they're worried about not getting enough work. You'll get plenty of work. Don't worry. And you don't, I used to sell corral design books, make very much money on that. You know, there's some things, yes, I'm not going to give away the visual thinking book, but I've also put some of the basic things on that up on open access. Give it away. Don't hoard your IP. Give it away. No, we're too senior a group here. I'll be 76 this summer. And the big thing I want to work on right now is getting young people doing more things. And they're going to find out that some dog event will be the best thing for them for their mental health, also the best thing for the dogs. Many dogs spend too much time locked up in the house. But I walk through the housing divisions and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I hear, man, whine, 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 scratch, scratch, scratch. They're not doing enough. The leash laws have some unintended bad effects. You got to really work hard to give a dog a good life. Way too restricted a life. I see people yanking them away from the tree they want to smell. No, that's their social life, smelling trees. That's going down to the coffee shop. You got to smell some good butts too. That's another thing that they want to do. Maybe that's not something we want to do, but that's something they want to do. So what I hope I have done is to get you to think about different ways of problem solving. Now, I do have a genetics book you can buy online, and it's called Genetics and the Behavior of Domestic Animals. Genetics and the Behavior of Domestic Animals, Temple Grandin editor. I have a lot of different authors on that. And I also looked up Lamarck's Revenge on Amazon right during the question period. Yeah, I think maybe overstated a bit. But this epigenetic stuff, yeah, this may explain why the hump height varied on cattle where it was not supposed to. Okay, we'll stop there.